Within a vast, mysterious universe, whose origin and future are incomprehensible to human minds, there spins a small planet that houses a variegated human family. Those of us concerned about the right to be variegated are determined to preserve the wall of separation between church and state and the freedoms ensured by the First Amendment to our Constitution, which begins, Congress shall make no law regarding the establishment of religion. Food for Thought Productions is pleased to present the champion of independent thought, Matt Cherry, director of the Council for Secular Humanism, and IHU, the International Humanist and Ethical Union. Mr. Cherry brings us a report on humanism and atheism around the world.
Hello, I'm Lee Baker, producer of this series, and I'm just delighted to have as a guest Mr. Matt Cherry, who is one of the most active people in the free thought humanist movement, not only in this country, but throughout the world. And we're just thrilled to have you, Matt. And
thank you, Lee. It's a pleasure to be here.
We reminisced about our previous meetings until our conversation was interrupted when we heard Matt being introduced for his formal speech.
As Tom mentioned, I previously worked for the humanist movement in Britain and then went to Holland, where I worked for the International Humanist and Ethical Union, before finally coming to America. So in this sense, I have followed the same path as the Pilgrim Fathers, who of course left Britain when they found that Britain was not tolerant enough of their beliefs, and went to Holland first of all. But they weren't happy with Holland either, because the Dutch tolerated the Puritans' religion, but they also tolerated all the heretics and non-believers and dissidents as well. So finally the Pilgrim Fathers came to America, where they were free to practice their own religion, but also to persecute anyone who disagreed with them. So following in the Pilgrim Fathers' footsteps on my own secular pilgrimage, so to speak, I feel a certain responsibility to try and do something about the heritage of the Pilgrim Fathers, and I'm very pleased to be able to do a little bit to try and clear up the mess they left, although you seem to have done a pretty good job yourselves. My topic today will be humanism around the world. Now, I'll be talking about the International Humanist and Ethical Union, but I'll also look at the work of some of the more successful humanist groups around the world, in particular those in Holland, Norway, and India. There are over 100 national humanist organizations in the world. These organizations are located in nearly 50 countries covering 6 continents. They include membership organizations, publishing firms, international development agencies, educational institutes, social work agencies, broadcasting stations, and much else besides. All these groups share a common philosophy and similar principles. The common humanist philosophy will no doubt be familiar to most of you, but I'd briefly like to go over it, and I would reduce it to 3 key components. Firstly, humanism is a naturalistic worldview. That is to say, humanists see no evidence for a supernatural realm, and therefore reject any belief in gods or higher beings, and any belief in an afterlife or spiritual plane. Humanism accepts that human beings are products of natural evolution, and that human understanding and human values are precisely that, human, with no need for a transcendental or supernatural basis. Secondly, humanism is an ethical life stance based on human autonomy and dignity. It affirms that people have the right and the responsibility to give shape and meaning to their life. And it emphasizes the positive development of our own personal potential while demanding that we respect the rights and well-being of others. Thirdly, humanism embraces a rational and open methodology. We believe that science and rational inquiry are the best tools for gaining reliable knowledge of our world. Before moving on, I should also note that these shared philosophical positions give rise to many very important shared principles that shape the work of humanists and humanist groups. For example, humanists are unswerving in their support for human rights and democracy, for free inquiry and rational discourse, and for tolerance and cooperation. and this is true of all humanist groups around the world. The most secular and the most humanist country in Europe is probably Holland, where at least 55% of the population do not believe in God, and whose social policies are a byword for enlightened humanism and tolerance. The Dutch state supports many social services that are linked to people's religion or life stance. Examples include moral and life stance education in schools, counseling in hospitals, in the armed forces, and in universities, and even TV and radio programs that relate to ethical issues. In all these areas, the Dutch government supports religious and humanist groups so that they can meet the needs of their respective communities. As a result, there are over 1,000 professional humanists in Holland. And this includes humanist educators, humanist counselors, humanist development agency workers, humanist broadcasters, providers of humanist housing for the elderly, and so on. The same model is followed in Belgium, where over 500 humanist professionals work under the direction of the national humanist groups. And a similar model is also beginning to emerge in Germany, where the German humanists have grown spectacularly since the unification of East and West Germany in 1989. And the German Humanist League now has over 400 professional educators and counselors under its direction. So we can see that in Europe, there are several thousand professional humanist, full-time humanist workers who are promoting humanist ideas and catering to the needs of the non-religious community. The German humanists have also taken the lead in helping humanist groups in the liberated countries of the former Eastern Bloc. The German Humanist League has financed and run the IHU Secretariat for Central and Eastern Europe, which supported the creation and growth of humanist groups in Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic. And the work of the Germans is in addition to the work of the Council for Secular Humanism, which has helped form and finance the new Russian Humanist Society, as well as providing financial support for the Polish Humanist magazine. As many of you may have heard, after the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe and the liberation of these countries, there's an enormous drive by many religious groups in the West to try to convert Eastern Europe, to re-evangelize half a continent. And groups as diverse as the Vatican, the Scientologists, Moonies, and Mormons sent missionaries and invested huge amounts of money in trying to convert Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. And I think it was extremely important that the humanist groups of the West should have got together to provide support for an alternative. And I would like to talk about the work of the Atheist Center, which is in Vijayawada in the southeastern state of Andhra Pradesh, and in particular their work in trying to eradicate religious prostitution. In India, in the Hindu religion, there is a belief, a system called the Jogini system. And according to this system, girls from certain lower caste or untouchable caste families may, at a young age, be married to a local god. And when the girls reach the age of puberty, they're ritually raped by the local priest, and then they become the public sexual property of the upper caste men, and they cannot refuse sexual favors to any of the men from the upper castes. And this is a religious ceremony, this is a religious tradition, and it includes other factors. That they have to dance at funerals, they have certain roles to play. The Atheist Center in Vijayawada dedicated itself to eradicating religious prostitution in its state and in India. First of all, they got religious prostitution outlawed by the state government. This was a beginning, but it was not enough in itself, because they still had to persuade change to take place at the village level. They still had to persuade the priests to stop initiating girls into the system, and they had to find a way of helping the women and their children who are involved in this terrible system. They had to find a way for them to escape and live a life independent of that. And to this end, they have provided education for the priests and the villagers as to why this system is wrong. They have provided education for the women and for their children so that they're able to earn their own living outside of the Jogini system. And they've even got the government to support them in providing some land and some livestock so that the women can live independently on their own, and they help them to arrange marriages through a marriage bureau and to become independent of this system. In the late 1980s, in the state of Andhra Pradesh alone, there were over 10,000 women who were jogini, who were religious prostitutes. And many of these women had a lot of children. Often a jogini will have 4 or 5 children before the age of 25, and they will very often die in their 20s or 30s because it's a terrible life for them. Now they have less than 5,000 religious prostitutes still practicing, and the atheists are convinced that by 2005 they will have entirely eradicated this terrible system. And this is one of many programs run by the Atheist Center, and the Atheist Center is just one of many humanist groups in India. And it's an example of the wonderful work they're doing, and an example of how the humanist approach can both eradicate a terrible evil, but also give the people the means to live their own lives with dignity and the means to look after themselves. Last year, there was an international conference held in Warsaw, Poland, which brought together humanists from throughout Central and Eastern Europe, from Romania and Bulgaria, from Russia, from the Ukraine and the Czech Republic, and from Slovakia, and brought all these people together to explore their ideas and to discuss their groups. And perhaps even more impressive, I had a report on this from Paul Kurtz and Tim Madigan from the Center for Inquiry, who both went to the conference in Warsaw, and they were amazed at the beginning of the conference when they received a long message from the Prime Minister of Poland, who expressed his strong support for the work of the humanists, who expressed his delight that a humanist conference was being held in Warsaw, and he thanked the humanists for their work in ensuring that Poland remained a secular state, and for their work in showing that ethics and values could be independent of a religion. And I think this is particularly impressive when you realize that Poland was the #1 target of the Vatican. The Polish Pope made it one of his personal missions to make Poland into the most Catholic country in the world. And I think we can now see that he's failed in that, although there were some very strong Polish politicians who supported the Vatican and who helped criminalize abortion and remove sex education from schools and to enforce priestly moral education in all the schools. All of these regressive moves have now been quashed by the new government, and there appears to be a majority in favor of secularism in Poland. And I think this is an achievement that the humanists in the West can take a certain pride in, as we have helped support the Polish humanists. The humanist movement with the largest membership in Europe is in Norway. The Norwegian humanists have over 60,000 adult members out of a total national population of around 4 million. This amounts to about 1.5% of the total population. If the Council for Secular Humanism were to achieve the same effect in America and attract the same proportion of the American public, we would have nearly 4 million members, which exceeds even the targets of our own 10-year plan. Maybe in 20 years we'll have that many. The Norwegian membership is not only large, but it is rapidly expanding. It has grown 30-fold in less than 20 years. In 1977, they had only 1,700 members, and they expect to exceed 100,000 members within 5 years. There are many reasons for the success of the humanist movement in Norway, and many of these reasons are the familiar ones of good organization, strong outreach, and attractive programs. But one of the most distinctive reasons has been the provision of humanist celebrations. And this includes humanist weddings, humanist funerals, and in particular, humanist coming-of-age ceremonies, which is perhaps something unique to Scandinavia, but which has fulfilled a need which is felt in many countries, I think. In Norway, there's a tradition of having a ceremony when you're 17 or 18 in which you accept your adulthood, a coming-of-age ceremony. The humanists started to provide an alternative to this, where they would provide 6 or 7 weeks of education on moral values, of the responsibilities of adulthood, on sex and civic responsibilities. And at the end of this course, all the students would come together in a ceremony held at the local town hall and usually presided over by the mayor, in which they would accept a document on their passing the course and accept their responsibilities as adults. And the humanists have found that this is not only a fantastic way of reaching out to young people, of imparting their values, but because of the number of people who come to these ceremonies, all the friends, all the family, all the relatives, it's a fantastic way of reaching the public. In fact, the ceremonies for coming of age are so popular that the Norwegians have calculated that on average, every Norwegian attends a humanist ceremony once every 7 years. And this is a very good way of not only making humanism visible, but it shows people that humanism has a respectable, thoughtful, and a dignified approach to life, and that humanists have a positive message to convey and are contributing to society in a very positive and constructive manner. And I feel this is one of the reasons why in Norway the humanists have been able to grow and prosper. Even the opponents of humanism are forced to recognize that it is a respectable and a distinguished approach to life. In 1995, I spent a few days visiting the local humanist group in Stavanger, which is on the southeast coast of Norway. Stavanger has a population of about 130,000, 140,000 people, and the local group at that time had about 3,300 members. They had a small office and a meeting room, and they employed one part-time secretary. The secretary was paid for and appointed by the National Norwegian Humanist League, which also paid for the office. While the local group itself was semi-autonomous and elected its own officers, the provision of trained staff and a humanist centre for the city was an essential ingredient in the success of that group. And indeed, the provision of full-time staff and independent meeting centres which were paid for by the centre, and where the humanists could say, this is where we meet, this is our centre, this is our place in the town. These ingredients are essential for the success of the Norwegian humanist movement. The group I visited in Stavanger held meetings most evenings of the week, and this indeed is one of the benefits of having their own centre. And the events ranged from conferences to poetry evenings to soccer matches. And the president of the Stavanger group told me that the secret of their success was that they made sure the group appealed to people's heads, their hearts, and their stomachs. So they would always have interesting meetings, intellectually stimulating meetings, emotionally engaging and rewarding meetings, but they'd also make sure there was always food at the events, and I'd have regular banquets and dinners. And this provided an all-round program which appealed to all of people's needs. But in Europe, they have a wide variety of models of church-state relations. So in some countries, they have what you might call a neutral model, where there isn't separation of church and state, but all religions and life stances are treated equally, which is to say the state may give government support to have a Roman Catholic chaplain in a hospital, but they will support the Protestant chaplain equally in accordance to the proportion of the belief. So, if half the people are Catholic, half the people Protestant, half the chaplains will be Catholic, half the chaplains Protestant. In those kind of countries, the humanists have been campaigning to ensure that the humanists are treated equally with the religions. So they don't argue that humanism is religion, they argue that humanism is a life stance, which is to say it's a way of finding values and meaning in life and is therefore equivalent to religion. And so in Holland, they have been successful in getting the government to treat them equally with religion, which is why they have so many humanist professionals, because they do have humanist moral educators in schools as an alternative to priests, and they have humanist counselors in hospitals as an alternative to priests, and so on and so forth. In other countries, you have a state church. So in Britain and Norway, you have an established church, which is the official religion of the country, and in those countries, the humanist movements are trying to get the church separated from the state so that there's no longer a state church. And in Sweden, they've been successful. For nearly 1,000 years in Sweden, the Lutheran Church, and before that the Catholic Church, were the official state religion. In the year 2000, that will no longer be the case. The church will be disestablished, and this is a great success for the humanist and secular movement in Sweden. So there are different models in different countries. In France, they have very strict separation of church and state, and the humanists are incredibly active in maintaining that separation. When the current French government 2 years ago tried to introduce religious education into schools, over 2 million people marched in Paris to demonstrate against it. There's a very strong secular sentiment within French tradition for separation of church and state. In Spain, the Franco government was very closely associated with religion, so when they got rid of Franco, they managed to separate church and state because they felt the Catholic Church was very reactionary and very involved in politics, and that must never happen again. So there's a lot of different models and a lot of different experiences, but they're all campaigning for equal treatment and for separation in one form or another. But I feel perhaps the best way of achieving separation of church and state, of keeping religious entanglement out of the schools, is to work with other groups who support this aim, whether they be religious groups or professional groups or whatever. We have to have our maximum numbers. We have to unite on this one issue. And you can work through the humanists, but also work through Americans United for Separation of Church and State, through Pearl and other groups. And as a humanist organization, we do campaign on these issues, but we also support other groups who act as an umbrella group to achieve this aim, often with a lot of support from religious groups as well. And I feel that has to be the best way in America to achieve these aims, is by lobbying and campaigning from the grassroots level up.
After Matt's speech, we had a little time to continue our discussion. When you spoke about these life cycle celebrations and so forth and so on, that you're really going into that with the council for that you work for. How far have you gotten with that? How do you train the people to do these ceremonies?
In the US, we're just beginning the work of providing what we call secular celebrations.
Yes.
And these are celebrations particularly for weddings and funeral memorials.
Life cycle events.
Rites of passage events.
Yes, right.
And it's our feeling that when you have what you call a rite of passage, such as a wedding or a funeral, it's a time when you pause and reflect upon the meaning of your life and your goals and aspirations. Let's say you have a humanist memorial. You reflect on what that person's life meant, what they lived for, what their values were, and what they meant to the people who come to the ceremony. Yeah. So if you're not religious, it's entirely appropriate that the ceremony should reflect that, and should reflect the humanist and secular values of that person.
That's right.
We're trying to provide this as a service across the country. And basically there's two components to that. Firstly, because these ceremonies are about the person, they're life-centered, it's appropriate that their family and friends should compose them, and often they conduct them as well. So it's up to the person to work out for themselves what they would like to say and how they would like to say it, and perhaps have a friend or relative conduct it.
Help them script the program.
Help them to do it themselves, and we facilitate that work.
Right.
So we're providing guidelines and books and so forth, which can be bought from us for people to do it themselves. But we recognize that in addition to that, some people would like to have someone from the outside come and help them and give them advice, and probably conduct the ceremony as well.
Right.
So we are training people to be what we call celebrants. That's people who officiate or act as the master of ceremonies at the celebration. Right. And we're providing training seminars across the country.
The director of the event.
Yeah, they will help the family to compose the ceremony, give them advice and guidelines, and then they will actually on the day go out and speak and be the main speaker at the celebration. And we're providing
hold it together.
Exactly.
That's wonderful.
And we're providing training seminars for these people. We hope to build it up over the coming years so that anyone who wants a secular celebration can turn to us.
Why don't you do video, instructional video on that?
We would like to do that once we have the training seminar established.
I'll give you my card.
Please do that. I'm pleased to see you promoting yourself at every opportunity. It's essential.
Listen, I wanted to ask you about the event that you organized in Mexico City, which was about humanism and free thought in cyberspace and so forth. Will you just...
Sure. This was a conference, it's a World Humanist Congress, which is held once every 3 years and brings together humanist and free thought groups from throughout the world for this meeting and to discuss ideas and plans.
Yeah.
This one was held in November 1996 in Mexico City. And the conference theme was Global Humanism for the Cyber Age. And it addressed the question of, in the future, the main media will be the internet, and the use of computers and other media technology will revolutionize how we operate, how we communicate, how we express our ideas. Just as the printing press brought about the Renaissance in many ways by making books readily available, so the computer and the internet will revolutionize how we communicate and operate today. So we brought together humanists from throughout the world, the developing world, the developed economies, to discuss this issue. And we explored ways in which we could improve communication and ways in which we could make use of this technology. And we were very optimistic about it. We feel that it's a technology which is very democratic. It allows people to put forth their own ideas, and it reduces the control of the big TV conglomerates, big media centers, which at the moment dominate, especially American television, but television around the world, the media around the world, and make it very conformist, very entertainment-oriented, and avoids a lot of serious issues. We feel that on the internet, every individual is equal in a sense of they can control their own media, they can control their own output. They don't have to be a millionaire to buy their own TV station.
Too,
yes.
You have the chat rooms and all of the...
So we feel this is very good for humanism because it allows greater interaction, greater expression, and greater kind of plurality of opinions. More voices can be heard. And this can be very advantageous for humanism if humanists will get on the internet and make use of it, build websites, take part in discussions. And we would encourage humanists on their own to do that. Get out there on the internet and make yourself known.
We hope you have found this program intellectually stimulating and that you will continue to investigate the ideas raised here. To connect with other like-minded individuals, please contact any of the dozens of free thought organizations, such as the American Humanist Association, American Atheists, the Center for Inquiry, and Atheists United. You may also email the producer directly via leebaker27@gmail.com. This program has been distributed through the courtesy of Atheists United.